The crash in the cornfields. The sky over Kansas was the color of burnt steel, low and swollen with smoke from wildfires to the west. Caleb Rowan squinted through the dust-blown glass of his quad drone controller, the screen flickering with static as the old machine tracked something strange over the horizon. "June," he called, his voice rough from the grit and sun. "You seeing this?" His sister stepped out of the greenhouse, wiping sweat from her brow. The air smelled of ozone and wet soil. She followed his gaze to the screen. A black dot streaked through the atmosphere, trailing flame, dropping fast. Not a bird. Not a satellite fragment either. It was too controlled. Too alive. "I saw the burn on radar 5 minutes ago," June said. "It's not military. If it were, we'd already be dead." They watched in silence as the object dropped below the horizon and vanished into the endless cornfields that bordered their land. Caleb clicked his tongue. "Northwest 40. That's our field." She didn't argue. She just turned and grabbed her medpack. The stalks were shoulder-high and thick with the humidity of late summer. They moved slow, rifles slung low, boots crunching dried leaves beneath their feet. After the wars and the collapse, every step outside the fence line felt like walking into a trap. But curiosity was its own kind of hunger. The wreck was half buried in earth, a long black vessel sheared open like a split pod, the heat of its entry still rippling in the air. Strange symbols lined its hull, no known language, but carved with purpose. Caleb circled wide, eyes scanning for movement. June edged closer and peered inside. "Oh God," she muttered. "Caleb, they're alive." He joined her, heart pounding. Inside the broken ship lay creatures, half insect, half armored mollusk, their bodies lined with slick chitin and twitching antennae. Some were already dead, curled in on themselves. But one still moved. Barely. She was larger than the others, with clawed arms folded protectively around a bundle of writhing pale forms. Larvae, Caleb realized. Her eyes, multifaceted and dark, locked onto his. He raised his weapon out of reflex. She didn't flinch. June knelt slowly, activating her med scanner. "She's hurt. Bad. Abdomen rupture. Internal hemorrhaging. She's an alien, June." "She's a mother," June said coldly. "And she's trying to protect her kids." The alien hissed weakly. Her mandibles clicked, and her thorax shook with effort. A small, worn translation unit at her throat, military-grade tech, crackled to life. I serve. I work. Tend your soil." The voice was harsh, mechanical, broken across frequencies. Just feed my hungry children." Caleb stepped back, stunned. The alien slumped, nearly collapsing over the larvae. "This is insane," he said. "We don't know what they eat. What if they're dangerous? What if they're scouts for something worse?" June shook her head. "Look at them. They're helpless. She's offering help in return. Caleb, we survived because we helped each other. Remember?" The wind blew through the corn, whistling like ghosts. Caleb looked at the ruined ship, the dying mother, the blind, squirming shapes beneath her chest. They were so alien, so vulnerable. He remembered his father's last words before the fever took him, "Don't harden your heart so much you forget how to be human." He gritted his teeth. "Fine. But if anything goes sideways, we shut it down." They brought her to the barn, dragging the remnants of the pod behind an old tractor. Caleb rigged a quarantine shelter with plastic sheeting and solar heat lamps. June worked around the clock with a med drone, stabilizing the alien and her brood. Days passed. The larvae survived. Grew. The mother, still too weak to move far, managed to rise and clear a half-acre of invasive weeds with her own claws. No complaints. No demands. She worked. Quietly. Constantly. Caleb watched from the porch one morning, sipping water from a tin cup. "She said she'd tend the fields," he muttered. June sat beside him, bandages still streaked with alien fluid. "And she meant it." He didn't reply. But deep inside, something shifted. Fear was being replaced with something even more dangerous. Hope. The grub and the grit. The barn smelled like ammonia and damp hay now, an odd, sour scent that came from the alien's brood. June didn't mind it much. Caleb said it reminded him of rotting mushrooms, which was fair. But the larvae were alive, growing fast, and that was what mattered. Zechraka, the name the mother gave herself once her throat healed enough to speak, had begun walking with a slow, deliberate gait. Her joints clicked and hissed when she moved, and her eyes glinted like polished coal. Despite her injuries, she worked from dawn to dusk with frightening focus. She cleared tangled irrigation lines, reinforced the root cellar with a resinous biocement secreted from her inner forelimbs, and repelled a nest of burrowing rats in the chicken coop with an efficiency Caleb had to respect, even if it unnerved him. "She's more useful than half the folks who used to pass through here," June said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Zechraka rake soil with her claws. "She's not a person, June," Caleb muttered. "She's something else." June frowned. "She's a mother. That makes her a person, if you ask me." The larvae, now finger-length and opaque, clung to her thorax or burrowed in makeshift nests of straw and nutrient gel. They cooed in rhythmic pulses that reminded Caleb of a heartbeat underwater. It was eerie, but not unpleasant. They required an enormous amount of food. June rationed protein bars, old root vegetables, even fish meal from the pond filter system. Still, it barely kept them satiated. "She didn't lie," Caleb admitted one day, helping Zechraka lift an irrigation pipe into place. "They're always hungry." Zechraka paused, her mandibles twitching. "Hunger makes strong, makes cruel," she said through the translator. "We flee from such cruelty." Caleb studied her for a moment. She had scars under her chitin, ridged and burned. Not fresh. Not from the crash. "You were running from something," he said quietly. Zechraka didn't answer. Later that week, a stranger approached the farm. Dusty boots. Homemade armor. A scoped rifle slung over his back. Scavenger type. "Nice place you got," the man said, one hand resting casually on the stock of his weapon. "Heard rumors of a crash near here. Something not from around here. Thought I'd see if you folks needed help salvaging." Caleb stood firm at the gate. "You heard wrong." The man smiled, all teeth. "You sure? I know people who'd pay good credits for what's in that ship. Tech like that could change lives." "We're doing just fine," Caleb said. "Move along." That smile faded. "You're making a mistake, friend." "Wouldn't be my first." Caleb didn't lower his rifle until the man disappeared over the ridge. June, watching from the porch, called out, "He'll be back." He wasn't scouting alone. Caleb nodded grimly. "I'll reinforce the north fence." "Wake, Zechraka." That night, under the light of a makeshift solar lamp, Zechraka showed Caleb something unexpected. With slow, deliberate movements, she lifted a fungal growth from beneath her body, glowing faintly green, knotted like a brainstem. "Grow food," she said. "Protein. Fast. Deep soil only." They dug a trench behind the barn and planted it there, along with spores she harvested from beneath her thorax. By morning, the patch had spread visibly, tendrils reaching toward compost and water sources like hungry vines. Caleb scratched his beard. "You brought crops with you." Zechraka responded, voice crackling. "Not all warriors carry weapons. Some carry roots." 2 days later, one of the larvae, smaller than the rest, pale and sluggish, began to fail. June tried hydration, warmth, even a rehydrated 4-pack from her old medkit. Nothing worked. Zechraka stood over the creature, humming in a low, tremoring frequency that seemed to vibrate the walls. The other grubs responded, clustering close, forming a tight knot around the dying one. It passed before dawn. June buried it under the old apple tree. Afterward, Caleb found Zechraka by the field, motionless. He hesitated, then sat beside her. "We lose children too," he said. Zechraka replied with a single word. "Unacceptable." It struck him like a hammer. She didn't cry. Her kind didn't have tear ducts. But the soil beneath her claws had been clawed raw, inch by inch. That evening, as the wind shifted and smoke from the western fires drifted across the fields, Caleb turned to June. "She's not just surviving." "No," June agreed. "She's fighting to live. Same as us. The soil between us." The first time Caleb saw one of Zechraka's children standing upright, He dropped the bucket he was carrying. The adolescent grub, now nearly 3 feet tall, blinked at him with glossy black eyes. Its limbs had grown long and sinewy, coated in new segments of hardened chitin. Where once it crawled blindly, now it moved with careful purpose, clicking softly across the barn floor as it helped stack tools in a rhythm mimicking its mother. "They're learning fast," June said, stepping beside Caleb, handing him the bucket he'd dropped. "They're watching us," he muttered. "Mimicking us. Same way kids learn language." "Yeah, but our kids don't secrete armor and hiss when they're hungry." June smiled, faint but warm. "You hiss when you're hungry." Caleb didn't laugh. His eyes stayed on the juvenile, who returned his gaze and then clicked twice before turning back to its work. In the following weeks, the alien children grew not just in size but in intelligence. They watched Caleb set irrigation timers and replicated the sequences. They mimicked June's herb drying process and soon began preparing fungus strips on drying racks of their own. One of them, which June had started calling scorched, began assembling a crude structure near the fungal garden, a dome of bent metal rods and resin patches. "They're not just learning to survive," June said one morning. "They're planning to stay." Caleb didn't answer. He just stared out across the fields. That night, over a rare dinner of corn mash and dried beans, Caleb asked Zechraka the question that had been burning in him since the day they found her. "Why here?" he said. "Why this planet? Why not keep going?" Zechraka paused mid-bite, mandibles working carefully through a mixture of composted protein and water. "We fled war. Our skies turned black. No food. No future. We sent out ships, not soldiers. Mothers. Caretakers. Farmers." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. "You weren't scouts. You were refugees." "Not all war is fire," Zechraka replied. "Some war is hunger." She extended one clawed hand, brushing the edge of the table with a quiet tap. "You still fight. But with roots. With soil. That is why we came." The line between guest and resident blurred with each passing day. Zechraka's brood worked the land now. They had names, sort of. June assigned short clicks and phonemes she could pronounce: Skrit, Nella, Gu, Marn. The juvenile called Nella showed a knack for fixing broken farm tools. Her slender limbs could reach where no human fingers could, and she had already repaired 3 water filters and a jammed windmill blade. They built a second greenhouse, half alien in design, with a resin framework and fungus-insulated panels. Inside, hybrid crops were beginning to grow, earth tomatoes sharing soil with nutrient-rich mycoveins from Zechraka species. The roots tangled together, inseparable. "Never thought I'd farm with bugs," Caleb muttered, watching them one afternoon. June smiled. "You farm with me." He gave her a side glance. "Fair point." But peace never lasted long. One evening, a drone passed overhead, silent, sleek, and military-grade. Caleb tracked it across the sky, watching its red light pulse every few seconds. "Scouts," he said grimly. "That scavenger must have tipped someone off." June's face tightened. "We need to prepare." They spent the next 2 days reinforcing fences, burying supplies, and installing signal jammers. Skrit and Marn designed motion sensors from scavenged radio parts and fungus receptors. Nella turned a broken solar inverter into a perimeter alarm. Caleb watched them work, side by side with his sister, as if this had always been their home. As if they had been born here. That night, by the fire, Caleb sat beside Zechraka, both of them watching the flames flicker over dry wood and resin bricks. "I don't know how this ends," he said. Zechraka's gaze didn't shift. "Then shape the ending. Like soil. You choose what grows." Caleb stared into the fire. "Back before the wars," he said, "people used to argue about what made someone human. Genes, blood, language." He looked toward the barn, where the alien children were curled in sleep. "I think maybe it's just choosing to care about something beyond yourself." Zechraka lowered her head. "Then we are all human. In the places that matter." At dawn, Caleb stepped into the field, the soil soft beneath his boots. Skrit followed him, carrying a bucket of seedlings. They worked side by side. The soil between them didn't care what species they were. It only knew growth. And for the first time in years, Caleb felt something take root in his chest that he hadn't known he'd missed. A future. When the dust comes. The sound of engines came at sunrise. Low, droning, unnatural, a hungry noise that didn't belong in Kansas soil. Caleb stood by the watchtower, peering through his binoculars. Dust rose on the western ridge, kicked up by 6 heavy all-terrain vehicles in tight formation. Military surplus, repainted in sand gray and carrying mounted cannons and armored soldiers. He didn't wait. They're here. June was already loading crates into the root cellar. HFY clicked in short bursts, summoning her brood into the greenhouse. The youngest grubs vanished into fungal nests. The older ones, Skrit, Marn, Nella, grabbed their assigned tasks, sealing entry points, activating camouflage canopies, locking down the barn perimeter. They had practiced this. Planned for it. But now that it was happening, Caleb's throat was dry. HFY met him near the barn door. Her eyes were calm. "You do not have to fight," she said. "I'm not fighting," Caleb said. "I'm standing my ground." She tilted her head. "Same thing." The vehicles parked just beyond the north fence. Dust settled around them in lazy waves. A woman in polished armor stepped out first, short-cropped gray hair, eyes like cracked stone. The kind of face that had seen too many deaths and called none of them tragic. She walked to the fence alone, hand resting on her belt. Caleb and June met her there. He kept his rifle slung but visible. "Nice little setup," she said. "Looks bigger than last year." "Didn't know we had visitors scheduled," Caleb replied flatly. "You didn't." She gave a tight smile. "Name's Commander Vesh. I'm with Preservation Force Delta. Heard rumors of a crash. And biosigns not exactly local." "You heard wrong," June said. Vesh raised a brow. "Really? Because we just ran a drone scan. Your barn's giving off thermal patterns that look suspiciously like high-density chitin colonies. And your greenhouse is registering active biocultivation structures that aren't in any seed database." Caleb didn't blink. "We're farmers. We adapt." Vesh's smile vanished. "This isn't a negotiation. We want the creature and its spawn. Tech salvage rights, per Article 44. Caleb stepped forward. "You'll have to go through us." Vesh didn't flinch. "That's the idea." The standoff broke when a pulse round hit the south fence. Alarms blared. HFY moved like lightning, her limbs blurring in the early light. She slammed a resin-covered barrier over the greenhouse entrance and turned to face the advancing soldiers with no weapon, only her body low and ready. Skrit leapt from the barn roof, spraying resin webbing across the gate, slowing the first attacker. June fired once, taking out a drone mid-sweep. Caleb ducked as a blast tore through the windmill, sending metal shards across the field. Then everything was fire and motion. The children fought without hatred. Their attacks were calculated, precise, not meant to kill, only to repel. But the soldiers came with orders, and orders didn't care about nuance. Caleb's world narrowed to sound and movement, HFY shielding 2 of her young with her back, Skrit shoving June out of a blast radius, Marn using the fungal root beds to trip and trap advancing boots. But it wasn't enough. Too many. Caleb fell, his side torn by shrapnel. Dust clogged his lungs as he crawled behind a shed. He saw Vesh, advancing now with a small squad. Cold. Efficient. She raised her weapon. Then HFY screamed. It wasn't sound. It was vibration, deep and violent, resonating through the soil itself. The fungal garden pulsed. Roots ruptured in the ground, bursting upward in tendrils of glowing green, wrapping around legs and weapons, tearing vehicles apart like paper. Vesh's shot went wide. She fell, her rifle yanked from her hands by a whip-like vine. The field fought back. HFY, standing tall now, radiated something ancient, something rooted deeper than war. A mother's wrath. "You will not take my children," her voice boomed from every speaker, every resonance amplifier they'd built. Silence followed. Smoke. A retreating engine. Then nothing. They were gone. Later, after the sun set behind a bruised horizon, Caleb sat beside the smoldering greenhouse. Bandaged. Exhausted. Alive. HFY sat beside him. Her chitin was cracked, one arm limp. But she was still watching the stars. You didn't kill them, Caleb said quietly. Killing ends the story. We still write. He nodded. They'll be back. Then we grow stronger. He looked at the fungal patch. Half burned. Half thriving. They came to take what you are. And you gave them what we are. Zitraka's eyes glinted in the dark. I tend your fields, human. You fed my hungry children. Now, we tend this world together. Caleb stared out at the soil. Black and fertile and full of things that refused to die. He thought of his father's old saying, the land doesn't care who you are. Only what you give to it. He smiled, blood on his lips, and nodded. Then let's grow something they'll never forget.